Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Victor Sekwajo. I'm a consultant for the World Bank, and I work under the Water Global Practice. On behalf of the World Bank, SADRI, and partners, I'm very pleased to welcome you to this series session titled Integrating Against Drought, the Southern African Drought Resilience Initiative. That's something we shortly call SADRI. So if you're just joining us, you can check our page on Partable. We posted some profiles there that we will kindly ask you to have a look. There are 16 drought profiles for 16 countries in the Southern African region. It will be great to have a look. So please go there, download, and then have a look. Also share your feedback with us when you have the chance to look at it. We are going to use the chat function as much as possible as we can. So if you have any question during the section, please feel free to put in the question there. We will be monitoring that in the process of this presentation. Also, for your information, the section is recorded. So please note that as well. In a few minutes, we are going to hear from some renowned speakers. We have Anna Chestari, who is a senior water resource management specialist with the World Bank. She's going to be our moderator for the section. We have Malala Wakunima, who is also a consultant to the World Bank. We have Michael Museba, he's a water resource management specialist. There's Nathan Engel, a senior climate change specialist. There's Inga Jacobs Mata, who is a country representative for IMI. We have James Soramba, he's executive director of the Southern Africa Development Community Groundwater Management Institute, shortly SADC GMI. And then finally, we have Daniel Sigai. He's a program officer at the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD. So once again, welcome to this session. I'll hand over you to Anna, who will take over as the moderator. Over to you, Anna.
Thank you very much, Victor, for the brief introduction. So as Victor said, my name is Anna Cestari. I'm a senior water resources management specialist at the World Bank, and I will be your moderator today, piloting you through this exciting session. So before we get started, we have a few housekeeping announcements. This session is being recorded, as Victor said, and it will be uploaded on the World Water Week YouTube channel, and all materials have copyright permissions. In order to have a productive call, everyone except the speakers will be muted. If you would like to ask a question or make a statement, please use the chat function, which is being monitored constantly during the session. This will let the team know when you have something to say or contribute. In a nutshell, the purpose of this session is to introduce stakeholders and partners to the World Bank Southern Africa Drought Resilience Initiative, SADRI, vision of having an integrated drought risk management across the energy, water, food, and environment nexus. And this will help lay the foundations for making Southern African countries and the region as a whole more resilient to the multi-sectoral impacts of drought. This session will also bring to light the value of integrated regional coordination among the partners in creating a proactive approach for drought risk management. The focus of SADRI's main objective of creating a platform to engage in dialogue for enhancing the partnerships and capacity across the member states and of the institutions in the Southern Africa region. And it's also to inform future national and regional investments in drought-related activities. Without further ado, I now invite Malala to give an overview of the role of the Southern Africa Drought Resilience Initiative in integrating against drought. Please, Malala.
Thank you, Anna and Victor, for that introduction. As already mentioned, my name is Malala Wakunima, and I am a consultant for the World Bank. I will be presenting on the Southern Africa Drought Resilience Initiative and its efforts to mitigate the impacts of drought in the Southern region. So the Southern Africa Drought Resilience Initiative, as earlier mentioned, also abbreviated as SADRI, is a World Bank program implemented with support from partners such as CIWA, the Cooperation in International Waters in Africa, SADC GMI, UNCCD, and the International Water Management Institute. The initiative commenced last year in September and cuts across multi-sectors such as water, energy, and environment in order to have a more drought-resilient Southern Africa. The overall outcome of this initiative is to have an improved drought management system and programs in the SADC region, where individuals, countries, and institutions have an increased capacity to prepare and respond to drought. Okay. So when drought hits Southern Africa, cities which are hubs for economic activity run out of water, power generation declines, cutting industrial productivity, and rural livelihoods, which are largely dependent on agriculture, collapse. This causes widespread food insecurity, and unfortunately, women are the most affected by this. The current COVID-19 pandemic has, however, worsened the situation significantly. It is estimated that from 1980 to 2015, droughts have... Hello? Can anyone hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. So as I was saying, it is estimated that from 1980 to 2015, droughts have cost the region $3.4 billion. And as they are the most deadly climate-related disasters affecting over 170 million people in total. So in order to address this challenge, which cuts across national boundaries, SADRI aims to build analytical and institutional foundations to catalyze national and regional investments in integrated drought resilience. In order to achieve this, SADRI is using the three key elements of integrated drought risk management as a tool to lessen the negative impacts and ultimate costs of drought events. Also, planning and management of drought events helps countries and communities develop a better resilience to climate change and its associated shocks. SADRI, as Anna mentioned, has a vision of where all the 16 countries of the Southern Africa Development Community are drought resilient in such a way that the governments, institutions, and households can withstand climate change and all associated economic shocks, which will overall benefit all the citizens. SADRI intends to bring this vision to reality by supporting countries, cities, and regional bodies to take an integrated approach towards drought risk assessment that is both proactive and coordinated. The program will generate and also build on existing knowledge and tools that countries can use to better implement and coordinate drought resilience strategies within and cross borders, as well as invite investment towards this cause. So the structure of SADRI consists of the umbrella program, which helps to coordinate and support the three main pillars. The major activities under the umbrella program include the stock taking and needs assessment at both national and regional level. The product of this activity is the development of the drought resilience profiles for the 16 SADC member states and the regional profile, which I'll later explain on during the presentation. The other activity under the umbrella program is the development of the Knowledge Hub, which allows for an immediate virtual online presence of these profiles. The expected outcomes from the city's pillars include a drought resilience assessment toolkit and a regional guidance note. Under the energy systems, we have the decision support tools for optimization of the Zambezi Dam operations, and also the Southern Africa Power Pool Drought Sensitivity Assessment and Adaptation Strategy, as well as a Drought Resilience Action Plan. For the food and livelihood pillar, this will focus on the development of agri-food value chain solutions for the management and financing of drought risks. The second activity on our slide there shows the review of strategic food reserves and policies for improving resilience to droughts. And the third activity will be centered on the operationalization of the drought resilience contingency components and mechanisms of agriculture and food security. The final activity under this pillar is the watershed management strategy for resilient livelihoods in selected river basins. A summary of our roadmap. The program, as earlier mentioned, began in 2020, in September to be precise. And by December 2021, we started the needs assessment and stock taking. We had our first virtual regional workshop in February 2021. It had to be virtual because of COVID and all the complications that came along with it. We had the first deliverables for all the pillars in June 2021, and we expect by next year in February, we'll have our second regional workshop. And hopefully this time it's going to be in person. By June 2022, we expect all the deliverables from the pillars, and by October 2022, we expect the initiative to be completed. So as I had earlier mentioned, the first deliverables for the umbrella program are the drought resilience profiles for the 16 SADRI countries. Just to give a summary, these profiles are created to identify gaps and opportunities for building drought resilience in each country and throughout the region. The content of the profile consists of the country's overview. As we can see here, we have an example of Botswana, and we can see that we have the historical trends, future projections, and also we have the profiles accumulated information and the 3 key elements of integrated drought risk management. Here we also have the drought vulnerability and risk assessment, which covers water and the agriculture sector. The monitoring and early system captures the trend of key drought indicators such as precipitation, temperature, soil, and soil moisture. The mitigation, preparedness, and response includes the country's related interventions undertaken in the past, and also the drought policy framework. So the profiles also identify the key stakeholders, the institutional arrangements, and the recent drought resilience efforts and recommendations that have occurred both locally and by external stakeholders. The profiles also has a section of the data sources used for their development. Apart from the 16 drought resilience profiles, we also have the regional profile, which is basically a comprehensive summary of the 16 drought resilience profiles that denotes the similarities and key opportunities across the 16 countries. So the regional profile contains the consolidated findings of the 3 key elements of integrated drought risk management framework. These drought resilience profiles can be found on the Knowledge Hub, which is under development, and these can be found in an interactive story map as well as a PDF version. So the next steps, we plan to continue with all our activities that I had earlier mentioned, and in turn, we'll pave way for improved coordination within and among countries regarding drought resilience. So this marks the end of my presentation. Thank you all for your attention. I will now ask Michael if there are any questions from the chat that we can address. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malala. What a very beautiful presentation you have made. I'm trying to check the chat. There is no question yet. To the participants, kindly feel free to raise your hand or type your question in the chat. And maybe just a quick reaction or question to you, Malala, and our participants. We all understand obviously that drought adversely impact on the SADC region, prosperity and livelihoods are at risk. And obviously this information becomes very important to our stakeholders and participants. So maybe just a quick question to you. Is there a way that the stakeholders and participants can access this very important information on drought resilience profiles?
Thank you, Michael, for that question. So yes, there is a way. And if I'm not mistaken, the drought resilience profiles have been shared in the chats, just in the Pathabo here. And we'll share a link that can be used to access them on our Knowledge Hub. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Malala. I see no question yet from the participants. Okay, there is a question from Muhammad Bayero. Muhammad, please go ahead and ask the question.
Hello, good evening all. Sorry, I tried to write a question in the chat box, but it's telling me it is disabled. Is it from my end or is it general? Can you check that, please? Thank you. The chat is disabled.
Please go ahead.
Yes, the chat is disabled. So the chat is done through the Part of Work platform. So that is where we put in the chat. The Zoom chat doesn't work, or it's not enabled. But please feel free to go ahead with your question. You're live.
Yeah, so thank you very much for that presentation. I was wondering, relating drought with the impact it has on water resources and agriculture, despite the fact that the forest fires we have in recent times, the world is technically on fire. We see these fires happening around. So I was wondering, is there any need to also factor that in? Because of course the heats are causing this, but is there any way you can be able to look into that? I don't know. I'm just thinking loudly. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I don't see a second question. To the team, can the question be answered, please?
So to answer the question, maybe Anna, you take it?
I can take it. Fine,
Yes,
no
please go
problem.
ahead.
No, I think it's a very good point that Mohammed is raising, and it's interesting because he very much intertwines and is relevant for some of the pillars that we are dealing with. And particularly, I'm thinking of livelihoods, right, where there is a certain impact on, the land, the forests. We're also thinking about, cities and tourism. So it's definitely an aspect that we are looking at through the pillar engagement.
Thank you very much.
Any other question, Michael?
So I see no further questions. So we can, I think at this juncture, move to the next step. Thank you for your response, Anna.
Thank you so much, Malala and Michael, for the presentation and the question session. So now we shall continue to the next phase of our session, which is titled Connecting the Dots on Drought Resilience in the Southern African Region. This will consist of a series of presentation and discussion from our partners from the International Water Management Institute, the SADRI Groundwater Management Institute, and the United Nations Conventions on to combat desertification. Our panelists will elaborate further on the value of regional partnerships and collaboration in fostering drought resilience. So now I will call upon our colleague, Nathan Engel, to lead us in this discussion. Nate, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you, Malala, for the excellent presentation. I want to encourage, again, participants to put their questions and insights and feedback in the Pathable chat, so we can pose them back to the panelists that we have here. But really, I really want to springboard off of the presentation that Malala just gave on the SADRI program and the work that's being done, and get into a little bit more about what do we mean on integrating against drought. So we have been collaborating with various partners, some of whom are represented today on this panel, and they have their own ongoing initiatives as well. So we'll hear a little bit about integrating with between partners, as well as some of the other initiatives that they have. So when we're talking about integrating, you'll hear, I hope, integrating, between partners, but also within countries and between countries, and then even integrating between research and practice and implementation on the ground. So first we have our colleague James Saramba from the SADC Groundwater Management Institute. Then that'll follow a presentation by Inga Jacobs-Mata from the International Water Management Institute, or IMI. And then last but not least, our colleague Daniel Sagai from the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. So they'll each present for 5 minutes, and then I'll facilitate the discussion. So James, we'd like you to go first. Please tell us a little bit more about what's going on with the SADC GMI.
Thank you very much, Nat. Thank you, colleagues, for facilitating our participation in this event. So SADC GMI is a center of excellence for groundwater in the SADC region. In the past 2 years, we have been implementing what we call the SADC Groundwater Drought Risk Initiative with funding from CIWA and JEF, facilitated through the World Bank. So this project basically I was trying to look at the drought scenarios of the region. Since 2015, 2016, there's been serious drought episodes that affected in 2015, 2016, about 40 million people. So we implemented a project called Assessment of Groundwater Resources Development Priority Intervention Areas in SADC region. So this project had 2 specific objectives: to perform a preliminary assessment of water resources availability, which could potentially be mobilized, focused on where such resources could be harnessed. It also looked at bringing together the role of groundwater and securing water supply in identified hotspots. So with this, we actually had an approach. We looked at the groundwater resources and its availability and the effects that drought has on it. And this, of course, looks at a lot of dimensions. This used the data that is existing. Part of it, a lot of it is remote sensing data. Then it also looked at, after identifying the, updating the groundwater drought risk map, we looked at the surface water availability, and then came up with the priority water supply interventions in those areas. So with that methodology, it looked at 3 key areas. One was the water resources themselves, and then the other aspect was the land-based activities, as well as the human settlement activities. So if you look at, for instance, in human settlement activities, you look at the population growth, you look at the livestock that they keep, the areas where they utilize groundwater and such activities. And we also looked at water resources, that is the sources of water, be it surface, be it groundwater, and the different pollution aspects and all those challenges. We also looked at land-based pressures that exist on the water resources. And mixing these, we came up with hotspots. So in total, we have 3 basic maps. The first map is the drought risk map. The other one is the surface water risk map. And then we have population vulnerability map. And combining these 3, we came up with hotspots. We came up with about 20 hotspots on mainland SADC, that is the 12 member states on mainland SADC. And then with the island states, we came up with 7 hotspots, of which Madagascar has 2, Comoros has 3, Seychelles has 1, and then Mauritius has 1. So what does this mean? With these hotspots, we went further to check what are the potential water uses, and we came up with different priority water supply interventions, including sand dams. We looked at rainwater harvesting. We looked at stormwater harvesting. We looked at dams, real dams. We also looked at runoff from rivers, desalination, water reclamation and reuse, managed aquifer recharge as the interventions that we recommend for addressing water supply issues within the hotspots. So this is just a snapshot, just to whet the appetite of discussing the drought issues and how as SADC GMI we have handled them in the past 2 years. Our vision is to then go into the identified hotspots and do detailed analysis to develop the proposed water supply scheme. So that's our vision moving forward. With those few remarks, thank you, Nat. I give over the time back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. Very interesting work, and I'll definitely have a couple questions for you on that as we enter the Q&A and the discussion. I do see there are some comments and questions coming in on the chat. Thank you. Keep them coming. I see one coming from my friend Mario Lopez Perez, and it's a good question on monitoring. I will ask Victor and/or Malala to prepare to answer that one, and I can also provide some comments and thoughts on that. But for now, let's go to our next presenter, who is Inga Jacobs-Mata from IMI, the International Water Management Institute. Inga, I kind of want to start your session by putting out a couple questions to you, if that's okay, because I know that we're very familiar with one another's work, and I think that you're doing really interesting. You have really interesting programs at IMI on the R4D initiative, or the Research for Development initiative, and I was hoping that you could talk about this initiative and what's planned as it relates to drought resilience under the R4D. And then also, if you could talk about, I know that it's not easy to implement this on the ground. What are some of the the challenges that you've encountered and the opportunities you've encountered for the initiative as you've all been implementing it at IMI?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Nate. And first of all, it's great to be working with the World Bank, SADRI, and especially on the drought resilience profiles, which I think had a very important task in the region. Doing this stock take of the frequency, of the severity and impact of drought, but also taking this kind of bird's eye view of capacity of SADC member states in terms of the three integrated drought management pillars that Malala referred to earlier on, and it's really meant to be a tool for engagement with SADC member states in how can we enhance integrated drought management, at the country level and also at the regional level. Now, maybe just to emphasize a few things which I guess many on the call may or may not know, but about 1/3 of the people in the SADC region live in drought-prone areas. So meteorological drought is endemic to the region, and it's I guess as anywhere else, it's had this debilitating effect when it has occurred, and also long after it has occurred. And we know from the World Bank's chronology of a disaster report that the cost of a delayed response to drought could be up to almost 4% of GDP per capita in low-income countries, and certainly, we've seen that over the very recent past with one of the worst droughts that the region has experienced in decades, from about 2018. In some countries, still faced with those drought conditions. Now, in terms of how we've managed it in the region, I think previous drought management strategies have relied on more reactive, short-term response approaches of providing more kind of post-drought relief, introducing restrictions on water supply during low flow periods, for example. But I think we have started to see recent efforts recognizing the importance of adopting a more proactive approach to managing drought as this kind of integral part of regular climate variability, and also agricultural production planning, decision making, and so on. So I think that was certainly something. I know that SADRI is very very focused on this, and I think for many of the partners in the region, this is also important. How do we move from this kind of reactive short-term responses to more longer-term planning, integrated nature. And I think also almost as a mirror of how drought has been managed in this reactive, fragmented, uncoordinated way, so too have research initiatives been designed, been implemented in silos, fragmented, overly supply-based, with one development partner funding an early warning system, only to find in a few years another development partner funding, very much the same thing. And all the while countries are still struggling with the deteriorating observation networks, deteriorating infrastructure, and so on. Now, I do believe that this is changing in the region. Countries, development partners are all calling for a more bottom-up, demand-driven approach for, more participatory selection of innovation, of innovative tools, solutions that can also be scaled in a more inclusive and in a more coordinated manner. And I thought, just thinking of your question, there's just 3 quick examples that I wanted to share, Nate. The first one, as you mentioned, was the 2-degree initiative Southern Africa Challenge, which was an intense virtual engagement process that we held last year to co-develop needs and R4D priorities to achieve water security and climate resilience in Southern African drylands. We engaged with over 300 stakeholders in 19 virtual engagement sessions from May to November in 2020, and with 9 SADC countries as a focus. Now, the growing frequency of floods and droughts came out as the #1 challenge for stakeholders that participated in that process. And so we came up with quite an ambitious vision with a theory of change based on 4 themes: scaling climate smart technologies, practices, data-based advisory support services. Policy coherence and institutional coordination was another one. So how do we kind of work together to develop a shared vision for water and food security in the region? Another theme was around sustainable and blended finance to enhance low emissions from local to global supply chains. And then a 4th theme was around empowerment and inclusion. So understanding also the systemic barriers to achieving, inclusion in the region and what can be done to overcome it and so on. Now, reflecting on the process now, while droughts were the point of departure, I think understanding the impacts that, of drought, what are we doing about it? How do we prepare better? What became clear to us, I think, was that it needed to be seen as part of the fabric of the region in a way, not something separate that you do to manage away droughts. Just understanding that this is a drought-prone region, and how do we live? How do we live with it? Scarcity. So it's not just, that cyclical nature of when a drought happens and being prepared every 5 or 10 years, but actually, chronic water scarcity is very real. And how do we not only, survive and be resilient, but how do we thrive? So yeah, that process was intense. It was a mega participatory process. It was challenging, reconciling all these different interests and needs. But I think it set the stage for collaborative partnerships under our first project, that's sort of stemmed from that, which we call ICRA, which stands for Accelerating the Impact of the CGIAR's Climate Research in Africa. And it's a World Bank funded project. It's a big project. In fact, we had a session on it on Monday on the role of water in transforming Africa's agricultural value chains. But in a nutshell, it focuses on how do we enhance communication and delivery of climate information at scale to millions of users, coupled with scaling climate smart agricultural bundles, solar irrigation with sustainable finance models, drought-tolerant seed varieties and enhancing, the resilience of the seed system in the region, for example. But how do we do it through innovative partnership models? And I think, Nate, you spoke about that. You mentioned that, in your introductory remarks, that I think we are now being challenged. We are now being encouraged to work more and more with different kinds of partners, not only research partners. And we're working in 6 countries. And in Zambia, where I lead the consortium team, we are working with the Met departments, ministries, private sector companies, SMEs, agri-SMEs. And so, in a sense, integrated drought management is being addressed at scale in terms of building resilience of farmers, of agribusinesses, of public sector partners. So we're, in effect, we're building resilience or preparedness for the next drought. And then just quickly, to mention, realizing the impact that the 2-degree initiative and ICRA can have. We are now actually in the design phase of a regional initiative that we're calling Ukama Ustawi, which is part of this one CGIAR big, reform process that the CGIAR centers are undergoing. And this one, why I'm so excited about it, is because it's focusing on, again, water security and drought resilience, but it's targeted at the agribusiness ecosystem. And we're doing this because we're seeing the need for targeted investments that increase drought resilience from the farm to the market, but that by targeting this missing middle, this SME cohort, which in many ways are already helping build this resilience and reduce vulnerabilities of farmers. If we target support there, we can have big impacts on the entire food system. So anyway, Nate, I think I'll stop there, but I think it's just this understanding that drought management is now moving beyond the disaster management space or the humanitarian aid space, or the post-drought relief space, but it's actually now being integrated into resilience systems thinking as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Inga. And I couldn't agree more. There's so much that we can do, as you just said, on the proactive side, and not have to be just responding to this. And I think that that's an epiphany for many. And it's encouraging that there are so many initiatives like the 3 that you just highlighted on the ground there. And obviously many things they're going on that IMI's leading and partnering with. I'd encourage you, Inga, if you can, put some of this in the chat so that people can see and link to some of the initiatives, they can read more about it. So I want to turn to Daniel Tsagai and ask Daniel to describe a little bit of what the UNCCD is doing within the region. And then after that, we'll open it up to some Q&A. Thanks, Daniel.
Great. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep, we hear you.
Daniel, I'm a program officer at the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. I'm pleased to be here with you now to share one project in the SADC region, the Southern African Development Community Regional Drought Resilience Strategy, with mainly financed by the Korean Forest Service and executed by IUCN, International Union for Conservation of Nature, as fully supported by the SADC Secretariat, and also with very good partners from UMI, FAO, and the World Bank. So I'm just going to highlight this as a way of introducing the project of this UNCCD. But before this project, I think in the interest of the audience, it's good to see what are the major milestones when it comes to drought management, the integrated drought resilience management. It all started with the high-level meeting on national drought policy in Geneva in 2013. More than 84 countries came together. There is no way we can move the business as usual approach to become reactive. Let's try to work on a proactive drought management approach, and the integrated drought management program of the World Meteorological Organization and Global Water Systems Water Partnership and Capacity Development Initiative of the National Drought Management Policies were created. In 2015, you know about the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and the Paris Agreement. And in 2016, there was the first, probably also until now, the last Africa Drought Conference that was hosted by Windhoek in Namibia, and African countries came together to discuss about the future of drought in the region. And in 2017, UNCCD launched the Global Drought Initiative, which now more than 70 countries are now working on their national drought plans based on this principle of risk reduction. 19, UNCCD again established an intergovernmental working group. I might highlight this in the question and answer session. After all this, now we are trying to also kick off some pilot project, in the SADC regional project falls into this area. So this strategy or project, the aim is for the 16 member states to work on a common strategy. Yes, countries, the SADC member states have now more or less national drought plans, but there is a need for the countries to come together. The drought that strikes Namibia will likely affect South Africa, Zimbabwe, Mozambique. So we need to make sure that countries come together, because countries can learn from each other. And this project, the aim is to come up with a regional strategy to tackle drought at this sub-regional level. And we have identified about 10 strategic focus areas. I'm not going to go through all these 10, but at least this strategy aims to serve as a common framework for the countries to deal with drought. When they go for funding, when they go for executing some, they can really come up with something that they can say that it is our strategy. And the strategy by design recognizes drought-prone communities face common challenges, but it also recognizes the specificities of the countries in the 60 member states. So the objective is, as you could already tell, to mitigate impacts of drought in the Southern Africa region, but also it helps countries to achieve resilience at all levels, consistent with the SDGs. They are all signatories of the SDGs. And also SADC regional development strategies that they have. So it complements what they are doing already. And it also helps them to improve regional cooperation, organize data sharing among institutions. So just to touch up on this strategy focus areas that I mentioned, as I said, I will not walk you through all the 10, but at least what we have tried to do was these 10 strategic focus areas mirror the 3 elements or pillars that Malala has just shared with you: drought monitoring and early warning, vulnerability and risk assessment, and drought risk mitigation measures. So strategic focus area deals with effective drought monitoring and forecasting. How can we help countries enhance reliable data collection? Data is very tricky and important issue, especially in the context of Africa. What you cannot measure, you cannot manage. So it's very important that we work on data sharing, data collection, and also enhance the drought monitoring and forecasting. The other strategic focus area is on reliable drought early warning. How can we disseminate effective, credible, reliable early warning messages? Early warning, if it's not translated into early action, it is useless. So we need to make sure that there is some enable timely drought preparedness and response comes into the end users, the beneficiaries, the farmers. Effective regional coordination of drought management. And the strategic focus area, for example, is related to drought impact, vulnerability, and risk assessment, the second pillar, to enhance at regional level drought impact and vulnerability assessment. If countries are able to map their vulnerability to drought well ahead before drought strikes, how do we look like? And where is it going to mostly strike? For example, now we see a very devastating impacts of drought in Madagascar, which was very well predicted sometime in early, or at least the way we see it in late 2020s, but now we see the devastating impact. So we can already see that this vulnerability mapping is very important for countries to prepare themselves for upcoming droughts. And on pillar 3, to implement measures to limit impacts of drought risk reduction. How can we help countries to prioritize measures to limit adverse impacts, but also to reduce exposure and vulnerability? Who is going to be affected when drought strikes? And these 3 pillars, yes, but drought response mechanism is also important, because no matter how much prepared you are, you need to respond when drought strikes. So the drought response mechanism is also part of the strategic focus area. And this project is going to likely end towards the end of this year. And at least SADC member states, countries will be able to have a common strategy, and then they can probably learn from each other, and they share experience and also data among themselves. And by way of doing that, I think we will be able to support countries to go forward as one, to be able to mitigate impacts of drought together against drought. I think for now, this is what I wanted to say as far as this project is concerned. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Daniel. A lot of rich examples, and I think I appreciate you sharing the history of where this all started back at the high-level meeting on national drought policy, which has almost been 10 years ago. But there's a lot of progress has been made, I think. And again, it's about thinking about these three, integrating across these three major themes. And I see a lot of comments coming in on the chat about how they really relate to one another. They feed into another. You need, the monitoring to link to the vulnerability and impact assessment, which then needs to link with the contingency plans or an action plan that and triggers that are triggering actions as you enter different stages of severity of drought. So this is all what we're hoping to, I think, bring to the region. And I think your emphasis on the regional approach is critical, because it doesn't recognize borders. The phenomenon of drought does not stop at boundaries. So it's so critical to do this from a regional perspective. So we have a few minutes that I'd like to pose back to a couple of the panelists some questions. If you could all turn on your videos, and then maybe we could have our colleagues pin all of us so we're appearing on the screen together. So real quick, a first question back to James. We had a question on groundwater extraction and pumping in slums, if there are priorities that the SADC GMI sees with addressing this. And then if there, I also was just interested if you could give a quick example of where a hotspot was identified, and what some of the solutions were from your hotspot mapping exercise.
Thank you, Nat, for the opportunity to address that question. So from the hotspots, I mentioned that we have about 20 on mainland SADC. So one very interesting one is the one we found in Dar es Salaam. I think we know Dar es Salaam is growing into a mega city by all context. And the city of Dar es Salaam is one area where there's a high population density with high levels of urbanization, urban migration, which is increasing the number of people that are dependent on the water resources. Dar es Salaam is also very dependent on surface water resources, particularly the Ruvu River. And the central water utility has some struggles meeting all the piped water supply to all the areas. So you find that there are many groundwater sources, wells of different forms and shapes. And it is also an area where pollution is very much prevalent. So Dar es Salaam therefore needs to look at other options of supplying. So in our assessment, we noted that in order to come up with a sustainable water supply system, Dar es Salaam has to look at conjunctive water resources, that is mixing both surface and groundwater. And there are specific interventions that relate to manage aquifer recharge. There's a lot of surface water which can be, we actually worked in the past year or so on the Kimbiji aquifer system, which can benefit from managed aquifer recharge from surface water and to do new boreholes and get water supply to the city. So this is just an example, the pressures that exist and the consequences of compromised water supply to the growing population of the city. So that's a typical hotspot. And we have many of these and the different mechanisms that we recommend. However, one aspect that is very important to note is that what we came up with, as I indicated, was developed using very high level remote sensing data. It is very important to go to the ground in future and to drill down into the design of these schemes so that they become implementable as viable projects. I think for now, let me end there if I have answered your question. Thank you.
Thanks so much, James. And please do respond in the chat to the question from Mario Lopez Perez about the slums. So I'll turn to both Inga and to Daniel on the next question, and Malala, if you could come in on this. I think this may be, we have this question, maybe we'll squeeze in one more, Anna. I'm not sure if we have a few minutes. I'm not sure how long your closing remarks will be, but there's a question on vulnerability characterization. And I think, you know, there's a lot going on to quantify, characterize vulnerability. It's such a key input into understanding drought risk. So can you describe what you're doing on vulnerability characterization? And the question is specifically about developing a drought information system that relates to vulnerability characterization.
Maybe I can just kick it off and just, you know, maybe just to say in the SADC region, you know, we've got a regional vulnerability assessment program, and it's been going for, I think, I mean, over 10 years, I think it is, if not longer than that. And even in countries, SADC countries, where vulnerability and impact assessment capacity is perhaps limited, or where no vulnerability assessments are conducted at the national level, this regional vulnerability assessment and analysis program run through SADC acts as the primary vulnerability and impact assessment reporting mechanism, right, for that country on which member states rely for national assessment. So I think there has, you know, I just wanted to say this because I think there's a lot of work that's already been done. But, you know, what I think the challenge or the next step that the countries are trying to address now is to link that RVA process mechanisms with national vulnerability assessments, which, you know, are not always in sync. And I think also just improving coordination, you know, between these agencies to even within a country to develop and implement more coordinated vulnerability assessments. I think that could help, you know. I mean, yeah, it's not only one country that experiences drought, you know. From 2018 to now, it's really been regional, and so we could benefit from that kind of, you know, coordination across countries.
Yeah, thank you, Inga. And Daniel, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I can add. This just reminds me to the survey that we did some time ago in about 70 countries, trying to see what are your major challenges or the root cause of your drought problem. And we tried to tackle this question among the 3 pillars: drought monitoring and early warning, vulnerability, and drought risk mitigation measures. And to our surprise, there is a lot of obsession on monitoring and early warning, and a lot of things to drought risk mitigation measures, but there is not much focus on vulnerability and impact assessment. So we realized that pillar 2 is missing or lagging behind, trying to really work on your vulnerability. What is your root cause? Is it the coping capacity or the sensitivity to, you know, rain-fed agriculture, for example, more dependent on rain-fed agriculture? So there are a lot of factors that build what the roots for the vulnerability also. And so we had to do another round of survey with about 40 countries, mainly focusing on vulnerability. So the lesson that I learned is that I think there is a lot to be done on pillar 2. There is a lot of already appetite on monitoring and early warning. When it comes to preparedness, the first thing that comes to mind is monitoring, early warning, forecasting. But equally important is assessing your impact vulnerability. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. So we are going to wrap up. I'm going to pose one question back to all 3 of you. So if you could also highlight James. And I'd ask for 30-second response here, okay? So I'm sure I could predict what the answers are gonna be, but I think Rachel McDonald from EME poses a fantastic question to end this on the urgency of the issue. And she's asking, do we think that the recently published IPCC report findings, the AR6, will bring even more urgency to SADC countries' response to adapting to the challenges of drought? So 30 seconds for each of you, and then we will close. Please, let's start with you, Daniel, first.
Yeah, I think this is a very important question, and the IPCC report, especially when it comes to the UNCCD, we are referring to it because it has to do also with climate change and land, and the importance of working on land has to do with mitigating the impacts of climate change, but also drought resilience, what we call drought smart land management. So by working on your land, you can mitigate the impacts of drought, but also working on your land means also carbon sequestration under the ground, and that is also there is less carbon dioxide sequestration. So we are trying to tackle this issue, at least when it comes to the UNCCD in this area.
Great, thank you so much for that. And James, your views on this? I think you're muted. So let's go to Inga first, and then we'll wrap up with James.
I think the IPCC report is an important moment, important product. And the Africa Group of Nations is very coordinated to respond. Let me answer in another way, a bit anecdotally, and that is that urgency comes from experiencing a drought. And that's just the trend, the reality, in the region. So I think we need to see how do we get stakeholders to think more in the long term. Daniel always, I remember this point he raised in another session where he says, nobody will thank you for preventing a drought. But everybody blames you, right, Daniel? You said something like that. I'll never forget it. Everybody blames you for big drought impacts, but nobody's going to thank you. And I think that is also part of the problem.
That's the curse of proactivity, is you don't really know, you don't really see the thanks of the benefits of the action, but you see the costs of inaction for sure. So James, why don't you, if you can really quickly, because we have to leave 2 minutes for Anna to close. What do you think about this question on the IPCC findings?
Yes, I think for myself, what I think is that we should actually have a call to action. I think a lot of these innovations or products that come out of a lot of work are always not finding their way to the sustainable implementation. So I think the call for action talks to a lot of engagement and even capacity building, so that people are aware of what needs to be done, rather than, I think, also not keeping it at the expert level. Make sure that those that are lower down also have a stake in implementation of this type of reports. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you all. I know time is short, so I just want to collectively just say thank you for this. It's been an excellent discussion. I'm going to turn it over to Anna to do the closing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nate, and thanks so much to our panelists and to our participants for a very lively discussion and the excellent questions that gave us a lot of food for thought. So just a very quick, takeaway from the session. I think there is general agreement that we need to learn how to live with drought and this chronic water scarcity. And one key step is there, we have growing awareness that we need, there is growing awareness and also growing efforts being made to deal with drought more proactively and in a joint and coordinated fashions, where different institutions and different countries get together and they really try to manage water resources in an integrated fashion, and they try to balance uses, monitor water resources effectively, so that when the drought strikes, as Inga was saying, maybe, you know, no one even gets thanked because the effects are not so much strongly felt by the communities. So I want to really thank everybody for participating to this very very good session. It was a lot of learning and food for thoughts for us. And so we wish you a very good continuation of the World Water Week. And we hope to see you again and have the opportunity to interact again on drought in the SADC region. Thank you, and good day, good evening, and good night.
Thank you, everybody.